and welcome to this week's video. If your digital paintings keep looking flat, overworked or just a bit lifeless, it's usually because your values aren't correct. So today I'm going to show you how to fix that and how to build a loose painterly piece of art from start to finish. By the end of this video, you'll have the techniques you can apply to any artwork and understand where most people go wrong. This is the photo I started with, and by the end of the video, this simple photo will turn into something much more painterly. Before I show you the time-lapse video, let's look at the brushes I used. These were the wet acrylic, the turpentine, the Nico roll, the stucco and the kombu. Notice all these brushes create a different mark. This creates a sense of texture and interest in my brushwork. If you use all similar brushes, your brushwork will look boring. Also notice that the wet brushes, turpentine and acrylic do not lay colour true. They lay selected colour lighter. This is important and I'll speak about it later in the video. Layers. I have painted this dog on one layer. If you want to take advantage of the wet brushes, this is the better way to work, but it is also harder as overworking the painting is very easy to do. So if you are inexperienced, try starting a new layer at every point you are happy with what you've done. This will split your process up and make it easier to delete a section when you've gone wrong. Drawing. A simple way to keep your drawing correct is to place your reference photo on its own layer. Start a new layer and draw around the obvious big shapes of your reference photo. You can then use the guide throughout your painting to check your drawing is correct. This will help you focus on your brushwork. If you want to practice your drawing, do it freehand. Selecting colour. I can place my reference photo on my artboard in the following way. Settings, Canvas, Reference, Import. This will then allow you to select any colours in the reference photo by holding your finger on the photo. However, a word of caution. Remember that not all your brushes paint true. The oil brushes paint lighter, so you may need to adjust the colours you select by going darker, more saturated or perhaps more muted. Let's now have a look at my time-lapse video and I'll talk you through the important points of how to do this painting. Background. Keeping the background colours similar, I used the kombu brush and laid some very large strokes. Play about with the pressure sensitivity. Light pressure gives you this lovely grainy effect. I lay a few colours over each other, concentrating on making my brushwork interesting. A lot of these background strokes are still visible in the final work. Block in and value. Using the wet acrylic, I then begin to block in, concentrating on my major value blocks. I am selecting an average colour, average value, and building up what I gradually see, starting broad with limited detail. Getting these value blocks correct are very important for the dog to read correctly. I can simplify it into about 5 blocks of colour. I am switching between my wet acrylic and then my stucco brush just to add a bit of texture to my brushwork and make it more interesting. You can see at the point I get my value blocks correct because the dog starts to read correctly. Even at this point with no detail, the dog looks quite convincing. This is why values are so important. Correct value creates the illusion of 3D. It controls the light and shadow and matters more than colour. Get these blocks wrong and no amount of detail will save your painting. Composition. At this point I start making compositional decisions about the background. I am looking at my painting in terms of shape, value, symmetry and temperature. By temperature I mean warm and cool. Currently my background is a warm orange-brown, but I know in order to integrate my dog a little and transform it more into a painting rather than a copy of a photo, I need to change this around a bit. This is where I need my viewers to look. It needs to be my darkest value. I therefore need to lighten these areas so they don't compete with my eye and then darken my dog's eye. Notice this whole area here is a cool grey. This area up here is very warm. I need to introduce some symmetry of temperature into this area here. I add the same greys to this area up here with the wet acrylic on about 80% transparency. I want the colour underneath to show through. I then start to darken my eye and put in a bit of detail into the fur of my dog. Big shapes, small shapes. When you start to add the detail, this is when it can all begin to go very wrong. So as a safety measure, now is a good point to start a new layer. If you are brave, just keep going. It is very easy to overwork the detail. You will know if you have done this because your painting will stop reading correctly. At this point, you will have a small shape issue. The big value blocks we established at the start that the structure and form of our dog hangs off, they are our big shapes. They have to be correct. The problem happens when we start to add our detail. The detail is our small shapes. So for example, all this fur you see around the dog's neck, these are small shapes that live inside our big shape. When we overemphasize these small shapes, they start to compete with our large shapes and our dog stops reading correctly. If this happens and you have started a new layer, delete the layer and have another go. If you have done it all on one layer, you can try undoing or you can destroy the detail with a wet brush and re-establish those big shapes. Then have another go. In terms of hierarchy, big shapes are more important than small shapes. So in my painting, I have suggested that fur rather than putting in every strand you see in the photo. This way, I am less likely to overdo my small shapes and create a competing issue with my big shapes. The brushes I am using here are the Nico Rull. This gives me a really nice blocked-in colour effect. Then for a bit of texture, the stucco. Then to pull and destroy edges, the turpentine. The wet acrylic is really good for both large area blocking in and a bit of controlled detail, so I use it in the eye on full opacity. And then to loosely block in my collar and tag on about 80% opacity. See how I have used my turpentine to pull through the edges of that collar and to give me that very loose effect on the neck. Brushwork. Brushwork won't make or break your painting. It is much more important to get your values correct. However, if you want a loose and painterly feel to your work, the key is to use a handful of brushes that all make different marks. Lay strokes over strokes and play about with your opacity. If you want block colour, use a brush like the Nico Rull on full opacity. If you want texture, use something like the stucco that will give you a bit of grit in your brushwork. If you want soft or broken edges, use the turpentine brush. The more variety of strokes I can add across my painting, the more interesting it will look to the viewer. To sum up, get your main values blocked in so the painting reads correctly. Adjust your composition to make your artwork less about copying a photo and more about creating a piece of art. Do not overwork your small shapes. This is the fastest way to destroy your painting. Use a variety of brushes for interesting brushwork. If you would like to come and paint with me in oils, join my workshop on the 3rd of July. You'll find the link in the description below. There are also more details of lesson opportunities on my website, sarahhallidayart.com. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future painting tips. Thank you for watching and see you next week.